A very warm welcome to all the audience present here to the International Conference on Global Trends in English Language, Literature and Linguistics. We have successfully on to the second day of this virtual conference, and I welcome you all to this keynote speaker session 2. Before that, I would like to discuss about the organizing institution Research Culture Society, the School of Languages, Literature and Linguistics, Scientific Research Association, and the English Literature Club. Research Culture Society is a government research registered scientific research organization. Society is working for research community at national and international level to impart quality and non-profitable services. This conference is also sponsored by RCS. The School of Languages, Literature and Linguistics was established in 2001 and transforming literature and languages through teaching practices to bachelor's, master's, and doctoral research and learners, mainly Russian, Estonian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian languages, are taught as the medium of study at the School of English. English is also the very less spoken language at the school, so it is at the learning stage level, developing a language in the school. Next, we move on to the Scientific Research Association. It is also one of the co-organizing institution of this conference, which is working to promote scientific study research at international level, also coordinated with other research organization for the educational research events. Lastly, we have English Literature Club. This club is as a group on WhatsApp and Telegram apps, includes literature researchers and academicians for sharing literature, linguistics, and English language related information and knowledge. With this, I move on to the basic objective of this international conference, which is to identify the trends of literature, linguistics, and teaching languages, identifying various knowledge forms of literature and linguistics, analyzing the trends of literature, linguistics, and teaching languages. So, with that, we move on to our keynote speakers, and I would like to call upon our prestigious speakers for this session. Dr. S.C. in Evangelia. She has a BA in philosophy from Degree College, the American College of Greece, and an MA in applied linguistics from Hellenic American University with high distinction. She is experienced English for academic purposes (EAP), English for specific purposes, and English as a foreign language (EFL) instructor with an expertise in teaching EFL exam classes for more than 20 years. She has presented in numerous conferences in Greece, abroad, Cyprus, Malta, Bulgaria, and Spain, and in international e-conferences in Indonesia, India, Turkey, Pakistan, Morocco, and Nigeria. She has developed more than 50 talks, and she has authored various articles for the ELT News magazine. TESOL Greece, ELT Weekly, and newsletter are also in addition with the Scientific Journal of Applied Linguistics, Language and Linguistics. She is also Vedant's International Advisor and President of IAAR Europe, the International Association of Academicians and Researchers. She has been recently awarded 38 awards, to name but a few. The title of the Distinguished Educator for 2020 by Educational Leaders Awards 2020, CWD Voice Award by CWSIR, Education Excellence Award 2021 by ESN Publications, Outstanding Achievement by Cape Comorin Awards 2020, and Young Researchers Award for the year 2020 by EODoxia Research Center, and Curator of year 2021 by ELT Excellence Award. She has also 3 honorary doctorates. So with that, the list goes on, and I would like to please welcome ma'am, and the audience is all yours. Please enlighten us with your knowledge to the audience.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're most audible. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Greetings from Greece. Allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, definitely, ma'am. Please share your screen.
Once of my college students wrote that Brown, 2010, put high emphasis on the failure to distinguish between permanent and temporary shortages. And my question is, what would be an effective way to teach academic vocabulary? Because the phrase put high emphasis on is erroneous here. What would be an effective way to teach academic English? Spending hours or a lot of time looking for appropriate English for academic purposes examples? Well, definitely not. Because corpora, which is the digital home of corpus linguistics and corconduses, is the answer to this question. Maggie Charles, who is a contributor to the writing tutor in the Oxford Learners Dictionary of Academic English and the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, in her article using corpora for EAP writing development in 2016, that was published by Oxford University Press, claims that studying via concordances can show a college student or a university student that the synthesis, the combination high emphasis was not present in the corpus, and gave the student three possible alternatives, either to say place special emphasis on, or great emphasis on, or particular emphasis on. But let me explain more about corpora. That's why I decided to talk about corpus linguistics and the web-based concordancing for building academic English. A brief outline of the presentation is that I'm going to say a few things about corpus linguistics, mainly definitions, and clarify how we can read and analyze concordance patterns, talk about the pedagogical value of concordances, some taxonomy of applications, how they can be used in the academia and in college classes, screenshots of online concordances for lexicogrammatical activities, and some pedagogical implications. The useful definitions. When we say corpus, the plural of corpus is corpora, and it is the use of a collection of digitalized texts. So corpus linguistics is the study of language through corpora, and concordancer is a computer program that searches a corpus and automatically constructs a concordance. Concordance lines that you will see in my subsequent slides is a list of all examples of a search word or even a phrase from a text corpus that is accompanied with some context to the left and some context to the right. Teaching academic English vocabulary through corpus concordance lines will be my main topic today, as I said. And I would like to start with some the academic sources that can be used in order to teach academic vocabulary. So I will gear around three main academic sources for academic vocabulary. The first one has to do with Jim Burke's The A-List Words. You can see here that there are 15 words and some subcategories of words that are mainly used and are can be found all over scientific texts, even in journal articles. Then I will move on to the Averill Coxhead's AWL, that stands for Academic Word List. And before I move on to the third source, I would like to unlock what the notion of academic word list means. The academic word list has been developed by Averill Coxhead at Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and it contains 570 word families that appear frequently in academic texts. And these texts, these words, are not contained in the general service list. That is the list with the most common words in English. Actually, they cover 10% of the words in academic texts. And the aim here is that if we take into consideration that college students are familiar with words in the GSL, the most common words in English, which covers 80% of the words in texts, then by giving them and analyzing and helping them with the remaining 10%, if we add this up, it makes 90% of the words in academic texts. And this is all that we are all interested in. So diagrammatically speaking, the AWL covers around 10% of the words, as I said, written in academic texts, in comparison to the GSL, which amounts to 80%. The third source, not yet actually, I would like to show you more analytically that this list of AWL is divided into 10 sublists according to how frequent they are. Sublist 1 has the most frequent word family, sublist 2 the next most frequent, sublist up until sublist 10, which has the least frequent. So this it can be very helpful for tutors and college professors to help students understand the importance of the academic vocabulary according to sublists. So using the AWL, tutors can start by teaching the words that come first, the sublist 1, and then move on to the second and so on. The point here is not just to teach them how to use words, but just help them with understanding them and conceptualizing them at the same time. The third source is the academic collocations list. That was developed by Kirsten Ackerman and Chen using the Pearson International Corpus of Academic English. It contains 2,469 of the most common frequent collocations in written academic English. And of course, we will focus on lexical collocation and not grammatical collocations. Have a look just at the percentages to understand how we can focus on. For example, the most frequently used collocations are the adjective and noun collocations, 72%. Then we move on to the verb and noun, 30%. Then adverb and adjective. I'm going to give some examples. The first one has to do with reducing emissions, clearly visible, carefully controlled, easily understood, survey data, prove useful, behave differently, directly affect. So all these reminds us of academic vocabulary and mainly collocations that are used in academic texts. This is just a screenshot from the academic collocation list. You can see on the left that we have the head word, and on the right we have the collocations. So the head word, if we take the first one, for example, refers to the word ability, and the collocation that appears is cognitive ability. Or the second one, abstract, and the collocation is abstract concept. So we don't just focus on one word, but a synthesis of two words. I would like to say a few things about the variations of online concordances. Not all concordances are full sentences. If you can see that there is a head word in the middle, a word that is repeated, if tutors want to focus on the word complement, they can see that the main focus would be the word in blue. And if they want to have extra pieces of info, they can click on, after taking the link, they can click on specific areas that they can have a more holistic view of the concordance lines. Other concordance lines are full sentences. And this is the interface I'm going to use for the activities I'm going to suggest, the word and phrase info. I'm going to give the links, of course, for if you're more interested in using them. Reading concordance lines. The concordance lines present information and very useful information, but they do not interpret it. Interpretation lies within the sphere of the person and the observer, that the students, in other words, that they are going to use them. More specifically, this is a screenshot of an online concordance, and it is called KWIC, which refers to the keyword in context. The keyword is the one in the middle, multicultural, that is repeated thousands of times. You can be given more than 200 examples. We are interested in what comes before the target word on the left and what comes after the target word on the right. So we usually read them by reading left words and right words. We are not interested in the whole sentence. As you have seen, there are certain colors, and these colors refer to different parts of speech. The green is for the adjectives, the blue is for the nouns, the pink stands for the verbs, the modals, and the auxiliary verbs, the orange for the adverbs, and the yellow for prepositions. So by clicking back, you can see that we have immediately the syntactic pattern of a sentence. That is why we don't need more than that. Referring to taxonomy and the 7 applications of concordances, how they can be used in the college classroom or university classroom, they can be used for basic and advanced grammatical patterns. To be more specific, tutors can use it in order to elicit certain grammar rules, the inductive approach, or the deductive approach to illustrate and exemplify a rule. Contrasting uses, when they use 2 sets of concordances and they want to compare. Error correction, concordance feedback for students that want to develop their academic writing skills, sentence connectors, punctuation and mechanics, derivational morphology, the prefixes and the suffixes of words, and identification of recurring patterns, awareness of syntactic patterns. More specifically, you can see here some screenshots for mechanics and punctuation, the word however, the commas, then subjunctive, the grammatical pattern. It is vital that something must be done, rule identification, the gerund after prepositions. You can see contrastive analysis in order to versus so that. You can see derivational morphology, the adjective, prefix, important and unimportant. And these are just simple examples. You can use any kind of words you want to use and that appear in your academic texts. The recurring syntactic patterns, for example, be likely to. You can see how many times it is repeated with different sentences. And of course, the error correction in sentence writing, because I'm going back to the initial sentence that I start with of Brown 2010 that the student used, put high emphasis on. Having a look at the screenshot, you can see how many combinations the student can be focusing on. For example, it doesn't use any put high emphasis on, but it gives great emphasis or particular emphasis. Look at the word before the word emphasis, and special emphasis. So we have 3 combinations, 3 collocations, great, particular, and special. So the student is aware at once that this is an erroneous zone. Now about vocabulary, we have the taxonomy of 3 applications. For semantic disambiguation about polysemous words, I will show you how. Lexical borrowing, because we see many examples of Japanese words, Spanish words, French words, Russian words, even Dutch words that appear in articles, and collocation, the collocational bonds. So here we have the collocation bonds, the words commit, perform, and valuable. By using these 3 screenshots, of course, there are more examples by entering and using the link. These are just some examples to show you and get a taste of how this can work. You can immediately see how clearly these collocations can be explained: to commit a crime, perform experimental trials, and valuable insight. So there is no way that the college student can miss the target. Polysemy. We have the word pupil, the pupil of the eye, and pupil as a student, for example. You can see that putting the words in context and using contrastive analysis, immediately the student contextualizes the polysemous words. Lexical borrowing. Here I have used the word grotesque. The word grotesque is used to describe strange things. The English word is from the French and the Italian grotesca, which means a cave painting from Grotta cave. But using this screenshot and using concordances, this can be immediately explained because it says appear as grotesque, and then it says exaggerated like characters. So we have the context at once. So briefly, holistic observations about this abstract. This is just the abstract coming from a text, a scientific text, and you can see that there are words appearing like challenge, determine, and impact. And all these words come from the AWL sublist 2, sublist 5, and sublist 2 again. We can also see the academic collocations, literacy skills, common challenge, great impact, and we can also see sentence connectors and punctuation. So if we want to help them analyzing the abstract, which is the heart and the soul of scientific texts, by using concordances, we can immediately make them understand and get the context of this academic vocabulary. Now, let me move on to data-driven questions that can be used in order to design activities, a much more practical idea. These are just some screenshots from exercises I designed for my students. You can have a look at some of these for advanced learners. For example, if I want to teach prefixes, I can use the following phraseology: practice in identifying the root words in the following words with the prefix "an" attached to them. So this is just a question, this is just an exercise. Of course, you're supposed to get the link, use the app, search and locate the vocabulary that you need to use. And after the screenshots below the concordances, you can put this as the instructions and what the students can do. Or if you want to focus on mistaken sentences, you can give the questions like: the above given sentence is mistaken. Read the concordance lines below that can help you correct the word order. Or you can also focus on collocations and ask them if the collocates of commit are negative or positive, the semantic prosody, to have a look at the words before and after. What about pedagogy? Why concordances is a very useful area for college tutors and college students to use? Because the modern practices of teaching English grammar and vocabulary and grammar rules in traditional grammar classes are outdated, and it's very time consuming. At the click of a button, as I said before, you can have more than 200 examples. The diversity of the language is not fully presented in a dictionary. Think about it. How many e-dictionaries can have at once 200 examples within context? And this is inductivity process because the student can get engaged into self-knowledge. It is the idea of rule discovery learning. Concluding remarks are that concordancing is a challenge for progressive educators. We can help students view themselves not just as students, but just as descriptive linguists and researchers. Concordances, therefore, can be described as one of the panoplies of the wise modern English learner in the courses in higher education and the model of a new shape of language. And I would like to finish with the statement that books are the window to a world that eagerly waits to be explored. It lights up people's minds with wisdom, knowledge, and revolutionary ideas. What about corpus revolution? It definitely opens the windows to academia and a much more contextualized learning environment. These are the links. These are the references. And a big thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Evangelia, for this informative presentation on your side on teaching academics in English using and academic vocabulary and concordances. And it was a very informative presentation. Thank you for that. With that, I would like to call upon our next keynote speaker for the session, Dr. S. Chitra. She is a faculty and head postgraduate Department of English, Yanfula Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan. Uh, Ms. Chitra is a PhD, is an assistant professor in English at Yanfula Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan. Currently, she teaches a master's program in English, supervises the research scholars, and serves as a program leader for academics and research. She holds 2 decades of tertiary teaching experience. Her surface record includes teaching expertise in areas of English literature and language, along with curriculum design and course development. Prior to her teaching assignment in Shirabusti College, she was as head of the Department of Languages in a college affiliated to the University of Madras and senior lecturer in the Department of Humanities, Anna University, Chennai, India. Her areas of research include cultural studies, contemporary literature, post-colonial studies, European literature, women's gender studies with research projects in the field of Bhutanese folklores, action research on students' English language proficiency, faculty attrition, and impact assessment survey of teaching learning during COVID-19 crisis. She is also an IELTS trainer and has completed the teaching knowledge test certified by the University of Cambridge. She has published over 30 research articles in book chapters, journals, conference volumes, presented papers in 50 plus international and national conferences, had been the overseas examiner for doctoral theses, a member in board of studies for syllabus validation, and in the editorial board of international journals. Her active engagement in international conferences include virtual platforms, is in the capacity of keynote speaker in the inaugural and plenary sessions, and is a resource person for online academic workshops and webinars organized by reputed universities in India. I welcome you, ma'am, for presenting and enlightening us with your valuable knowledge, and the audience is all yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Greetings from Bhutan. Do you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am, you're very much audible to us.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, dignitaries and organizing committee of Research Culture Society, International Conference on Global Trends in English Language, Literature and Linguistics. My area is domain is literature. I will be very glad to share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's very clear. Yes, ma'am.
How much time do I have? May I know?
Ma'am, you are with 25 minutes more.
Okay, I'm just setting it for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Hope I can conclude within that time frame.
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Okay, from the domain of literature, the topic for the keynote address I have chosen is Self and Society, Literary Trends in World Literature. Actually, I'm going to deal with this topic in the reverse way. First, defining what is world literature. This will be the outline of my talk. Then I will connect it with the literary trends that prevail in Chinese and Japanese writings. If time permits, I will move on to Japanese writings. Otherwise, let me end with the Chinese writings and the brief developmental phase of Chinese literature, followed by the literary trends that prevail in contemporary Chinese writings, which are translated into English, and they fall into the purview of world literature. And some of the themes and some of the writings I can deal with can also show the interaction between self and society. What kind of social interaction has been captured by the Chinese, contemporary Chinese writers in the postmodern literary era? This is how I'm planning to work onto it. Here, I would like to acknowledge a few persons who had put me into this, in contact with Chinese and Japanese writings. Dr. Sushil Mary Matthews, Dr. Rini, then Dr. Rajeshri and Sering Somo are some of the important persons through whom I could get in touch with these emerging writings. World literature. How are we to define? What is world literature? According to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, 1749 to 1832, the concept of world literature emerged on the basis of left to itself, every literature will exhaust its vitality if it's not refreshed by the interest and the contributions of a foreign one. So this added a new dimension to literature by enlarging the scope of literary text and taking it and moving it beyond the narrow confines. This is where the phenomenon of world literature, though it depicts local history, culture, and tradition from a particular locale, it also moved beyond and joined the world platform by means of translation in English, and it reached a global readership. This practice, in fact, brought myriad cultural experiences to a wide range of readers across the globe, and now we could experience Chinese and Japanese writings too, which are translated in English. If we take the modern and postmodern era from 1940s to 1990s, there emerged many literary trends which captured the cultural and sociological changes of the societies once closed. Societies once adopted isolation policy and they were closed and they could not be accessed by the outside world. For instance, in today's talk, the cultural locale from where I delivered this talk is Bhutan, a tiny Himalayan kingdom, and it was also one such country of isolation. It practiced the policy of isolation since 1950s, and over 1950s and 60s, the country opened its doors to modernization. In 1960s only, it opened its doors. Till then, it remained as an isolated kingdom. However, today, to represent the literary trends, I have chosen certain other writings in translation which depict the social realities, that is, the Chinese literature and Japanese writings. Am I connected?
Yes, ma'am, you are connected. Yeah.
Okay, I could not see any images, so I was a little doubtful.
You connected.
Maybe.
Yeah, and your
Okay.
screen is also visible to us. Yeah, please continue.
Then here I would like to talk about the developmental phase. So if we look at the Chinese literature, it started with the philosophical learnings of Confucius and Lao Tzu. So these are the ancient writers. Then it entered into the framework of folk tales, and then it moved on to the avant-garde style of writing. Now, let me briefly trace the developmental phase which the Chinese literary works and its literature developed into. This can be broadly divided into 4 periods as early modern, middle modern, late modern, and the postmodern literature. If we take the early modern literature, the early modern talks about the Cultural Revolution. This is associated with the communist Mao Zedong. So he initiated this movement known as the Cultural Revolution, and the communist ideologies were referred to as the Little Red Book. And from here, we can move on to the middle modern period, where there is the end of Cultural Revolution. And this is due to the Japanese intervention, aggression, and Japanese invasion. And then there is the beginning of the Chinese Communist Party, which is chartered by Mao Zedong. And that paved way for the advent of socialist literature and also a kind of literature known as literature of the wounded. So this development happened with the advent of dynastic literature. The advent of socialist literature started exposing some socio-political relevance and social problems to the world, but there were a lot of doubts about solutions to these problems. And during this middle modern period, with the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, the Cultural Revolution came to an end. That was the ideology earlier for writing propagandist literature. Okay, but that ideology came to an end with the death of Mao Zedong, and the country also was left leaderless with no futuristic idea of the self or of the nation. Literature produced during that period was called literature of the wounded, where the people remembered the past troubles and their difficulties, the kind of social difficulties, their social realities that they faced during cultural revolution that created this literature of the wounded. Then in the third, the late modern literature, this period is also called post-Mao literature after the death of Mao Zedong, roughly from 1970 until 1990s. During this period emerged socialist writings based on reforms. The writers are trying to concentrate and focus on social reforms, and they felt that literature influences the society, and here the focus was mostly on common man than on elite members of the society. And this was also the time when China moved from closed to openness, and it opened its doors to the Western world and started adopting 20th century literary techniques such as imagism, absurdism, surrealism by translating Western works to Chinese language. So this paved way for the literature of social criticism written during this period since 1970s, and also the writers influenced by the modern Western literary trends and the techniques and the style of writing that prevails in the world. They were exposed to a plethora of literature for the first time, and they started finding fault with the government, which was a bold step. And the socio-political scenario changed the map of China, and the literary period was divided into socialist literature and post-Mao literature. Then comes the contemporary period known as postmodern literature, where China felt the necessity of literature influencing society. It can influence society. That was felt. Hence, counter-revolutionaries were in fact ordered to write literature. We know what kind of country is China. It has very many restrictions, curtailed freedom, and even writers are not writing, even contemporary writers are not writing in their original name. They write under pseudonyms. That's the restrictive environment within which writers try to critique the government and its policies of the past and the present, when history is traced from 1990 till the millennium. So for the first time, the necessity that literature can influence the society was felt, and counter-revolutionaries were ordered to write literature which helped people stay connected to socialist ideologies, and the focus was on common man there. And with globalization and with the necessity to connect to the world and with the fast-changing world of literature and its techniques, Chinese literature ventured into English translation. Originally written in Chinese, the writers ventured into translation to connect with the global audience. This is a brief tracing of how Chinese literature emerged and the status of Chinese writings in the contemporary era. Now let me move on to the writers, some of few Chinese writers and the schools of thought that identify them. These are the schools of thought. Starting with propagandist literature, it moved to socialist literature that is built on social realism. That is the base. And then there is a branch known as root-seeking literature by revisiting the past, the culture and tradition, the national culture and the tradition to keep localization of literature. And then the contemporary period is known as post-Mao writings. And here you can see most of the writers not using their original name, but they write under the pen name, including the notable figures of modern Chinese literature face the same social reality. And one famous writer, the Nobel laureate, who established Chinese writings and introduced Chinese writings to the world by rising. He is called as the rising star. His pen name is Mo Yan. Born in 1955, and he lives today, and he writes and he produces many stories, short stories and novels especially. His original name is Gyeon Moe, which means do not speak. That's the meaning of this name. But he has started writing under the pen name Moyan. And the irony here is, contrary to the meaning of his original name, do not speak. Okay, contrary to that meaning, he started writing, and through his writing, he speaks a lot. He speaks about Chinese society, and his works are now translated in English, and he speaks to the global audience, and he brings China to the global readers. He satirically attacks the system. The bitter experiences in the communist-led China, the Chinese communist governance, are brought forth in his writings with black humor, because they cannot portray the reality of China as it is, but he uses history, hallucinatory realism, polynarration, intrusive narration, using folk tales, history, historical events, mainly. Many socio-political events are focused in his writings, such as starting with Japanese aggression, the peasant revolt of China, that becomes a basis for one of the plots of his novels. Then Boxer Revolution, he talks about land reform movement. So his novels are based on the entire expanse of the Chinese history from 1990s till the millennium, concentrating on different socio-political events and the conflicting events experienced by the individual self, individual characters, and the society during different phases of the socio-political and the historical realities of China. This is what becomes his forte. He talks about the social order that prevailed in China, starting from Mao Zedong's regime during Cultural Revolution. This gave him the recognition of winning the Nobel Prize for Literature for depicting the social reality of China, and especially for his techniques. He was awarded with Nobel Prize in 2012. Some of the influences for his writings are, I told you in the developmental phase, how Western literary trend entered into China, and that influenced the writers to imitate the style of Latin American writers and American writers exclusively, because they could find, Chinese writers could find some connection with Latin American writers and its plot and narrative pattern and technique. Internally, at home, he has been influenced by the social realist of China like Mao Zedong and Lu Xun, though he criticizes them. And also he has been influenced by the literary works and techniques of especially Latin American writer Garcia Marquez and American writer William Faulkner. And the technique Mo Yan has been influenced by is the magic realism. Magical realist and their techniques had influenced him. And for this, he has been selected by the Swedish Academy and awarded the Nobel Prize, considering his notable style to write in hallucinatory realism, blended with folktales, history, and the contemporary social reality of China. Moving on to other writers, there are also representative writers of root-seeking literature. That is another branch where where writers tend to revisit and return to classical Chinese literature, and they adopt the philosophical ideas of Confucianism and Taoism. So this is what root-seeking literature tries to do by trying to connect themselves, connect the modern generation with the past and with their roots Not completely, but this is to change the present because somewhere the values had been lost. And they are trying to bridge this gap which modernization has brought in by taking the people and connecting them with the roots, the ancient philosophy of China to the present generation and the present modernization and its development to find a balance between the past and the present. Then emerged a trend setting avant garde writer of the postmodern era, who was also awarded the James Joyce Award in 2002. All these details gives us an idea about the international recognition that Chinese writers are getting and the attention that they have been gaining. And I have given the names of other respected writers in the Chinese literary scenario, though pronunciation will be difficult, so I'm skipping it. And the writers translated in English, widely translated in English, most of their works had been Jia Pinghua and Mo Yan. His writings had seen its translation in English now. Now, coming to the literary trends, which is the focal point of my topic, what kind of techniques are adopted by Mo Yan? From his noble lecture, it is clear. He says written word can never be obliterated, and he believes in writing. And what kind of style he adopts, for which his works were selected? He says, I merge the style of world literature and I localize it, because if he imitates the world literature, the magical realism, if he imitates like that of Marcus in his work, because he has been influenced by the work 100 Years of Solitude. And after reading that work, he tried to create a piece, a fictional piece, a short story, trying to imitate that style. And then he felt he should not imitate it completely, but then he has to give it a flavor of localization. It is not complete imitation, but he believed in localization. And as a result, he drew the influences from Chinese culture and tradition and blended it with native tradition, gave importance to the historical events of China. The socio-political reality of China has been presented, and that made the local subject matter polynarrative. There are more than one narrator in his novels, which makes it rich and at times confusing due to this polynarrative style. And he adopted another technique known as intrusive narrative style. Having written short story collections, sometimes he brings a folk element from one of his short stories, and the authorial voice would intervene in the narration, and it will deviate from the main narration that is happening in the novel. And mostly he tries to give a glimpse of the Chinese history by ranging his characters over generations. It might be 2 or 3 generations he will try to cover to give us a glimpse of the past and the present and what kind of transition and what are the social conflicts that China has faced. And all these are little horrific sometimes, but at the same time, he adds aesthetics to the sense of reality, which is grotesque and painful, with an appeal to his narrative style unique. This is how he blends certain elements. He has inherited the traditional Chinese storytelling technique since his childhood days, and he retrieves those techniques from his childhood memory. He recollects the experiences of listening to these folk tales, especially narrated by his grandfather, who could memorize nearly 300 tales. His grandfather had in his memory nearly 300 tales. So that kind of storytelling techniques he tried to replicate in his novels by recalling them from his childhood memories. This makes his work more native in narration. And then he also blends it with the Confucian culture and the bandit culture, which are most important and which are prestigious in Chinese literary history by means of regional storytelling. He makes everything regional, locating his plot in a fictional setting that is also realistic in Shandong province in China. This makes his works more aggressive, and he includes all historical events that gives the aggression and masculinity to his works. And he highlights the regional culture and tradition by bringing some folktale elements and songs. And they are located in Gaomi Township, North Gaomi Township, known as NGT, influenced by Mokando of Marcus Mokando, the fictional setting, and William Faulkner's Yoknapatawa. He tries to create this Gaomi country and township, which adds mystery and magical element. The aura of mystery and magical element has been created in his fictional setting. He says, with love and freedom, that he emphasizes on personal and social relations. This is where the next emphasis on the topic self and society comes into play. He gives importance to the interaction between individuals or groups and the society. Social interaction becomes the meeting point of the personal and social relations, and how conflicts change the lives not only of the individuals through horrific events, but also it brings a transformation to the society, that there is a change at the end. It is a reciprocity of change at the individual level and at the social level, but it is not a smooth way towards change and progress, but it is all through conflicts. And he also adds the essence of root-seeking literature in his writings. He combines fantasy and history to deliver the element of magical realism. And this is the impact of Garcia Marquez and what Marquez has left on Oriental China, because during the translation phase, when Western works were translated in Chinese, Marquez became more popular, and Latin American social reality somewhat matched with the remote, the rural reality of China, and the Chinese could locate themselves and connect themselves with the reality depicted by Marquez. And that is the reason magical realism as a technique became more popular than the other techniques. And another reason to introduce the essence of root-seeking literature in his writing is that when he covers the expanse of life from the past to the present, he finds that there is a sense of loss. And as a result, to fill the gap of loneliness or the loss experienced by the modern present generation, he himself makes the characters of the third generation find the urban life more weary and tiresome and meaningless. And as a result, Moyon, as a narrator, tries to search for new meaning from his ancestors. What their ancestors has shown from their philosophy, he tries to add new meaning, to add value to the lives of the present generation. That's why the essence of root-seeking literature is also felt in his writings, along with the element of fantasy and history, which he blends in his writings through a technique known as hallucinatory realism. This technique is considered to be a part. It stands between magical realism and surrealism. So what exactly is hallucinatory realism? This term is mentioned in this Nobel Prize speech. He mentions it, and this is the reason for which he has been awarded. And this term came into use since 1970s to denote a dream-like transition while narrating the story. The narrator will enter into a state of dream, and there will be a transition from reality to that of fantasy. So there is a transition. The readers will be transported to a dream world, but before that, there will be a detailed description of the natural environment or the social environment where the narrator is. So it is also blended with reality. It is not just building castle in the air. From reality, it moves into the air. So it is, in a way, quote unquote, it's a careful and precise delineation of detail. Yet it is real, okay, which does not depict the external reality, since the subjects realistically depicted, they all belong to the realm of dream and fantasy. Somewhere the characters are caught between the state of dream and fantasy, and from reality they are transported to this state. I'll give you two brief examples if time permits. Shall I?
Yes, sure, ma'am. Proceed, ma'am.
Yeah, this novel is quite popular, and before he was awarded the Nobel Prize, this novel was taken into consideration. It is titled The Garlic Ballads. Garlic Ballads. This is based on peasants' revolt, which broke out in China. Famously, it is also known as the Garlic Riot, known as Kangshan, Kangshan, Kangshan Garlic Incident. That's how it is called famously in China, where hundreds of peasants, they revolted against the surging price of garlic crop, meaning the price came down and the government ordered the peasants to grow only one crop, that is garlic. But then when the peasants harvested the crop and when it was brought to the market to sale, there was abundance and the godowns were full and the government could not take more of it, and they could not preserve the crop for any other purpose. The godowns were full, so the prices dropped down and there was a revolt and there is a resistance by the farmers, the peasants, and they were all starving. And here one important thing is hunger is considered as one of the muses. History and hunger, these are considered to be the muses of Moyan's writing. And the peasants started ransacking the government offices because there was no responsible officer to give them a reply. So they turned into an angry, uncontrollable mob. This is the scene. Let me come to the element of hallucinatory realism, how it is presented. The past incident, past means not from a remote past, but from the recent past. It appears in the character's mind in the form of a reverie, and it will have an effect on the present. So the reality, the present condition of the character or the environment in which the character is will also be taken into account. So there will be an oscillation actually between memory and reality. This is what happens in the novel. The protagonist named Go Yang, while he is in prison, he hallucinates his mother's burial. Actually, he is in prison because of, after his mother's death, instead of cremating his mother, he belongs to a landlord status. And according to the policy, government policy, those who are in landlord status are supposedly to cremate. But instead of cremating his mother, he buried. There was incessant rain and he did this burial by burying her, and he did not cremate her. Then when he buried her and came home, he found police waiting for him to arrest because he violated the government policy. You can imagine how restrictive the environment is. And this lands him in prison, okay? And immediately in the prison, he hallucinates his mother's burial, and he also remembers his childhood. And these are all recreated in the present when he is in prison, arrested for the burial of his mother, and he was also charged a fine of 200 yuan. This is one example. Then in another novel, Red Sorghum, the narrator addresses the society focusing on how things have changed over generations, which I have already told you. His novel covers the expanse of generations. Along with people becoming modern, the third generation, if you take into account, people have already become modern. And not only the people, even their native crop, which carries the name red sorghum, that's the name of the crop, even that crop has become hybrid sorghum. With modernization and industrialization, Even the crop has become hybrid sorghum with gray-green eyes. And these hybrid variety pollute the pure air of NGT, that is North Gaomi Township, with their dark, gloomy, ambiguous faces. So through the crop, he shows the predicament of the contemporary generation of China. They experience a powerful sense of loss. That's what he shows. One more novel by the title Big Breast, Wide Hips. It talks about the matriarchal Chinese family system with the major character addressed as Mother Shangwan Lu, that is her name. It talks about her clan, her daughters, and her son. She has 9 children, and the story is narrated by her 9th child, who is a son, a male, and he talks about his sisters. He narrates about the lives of his sisters. The 3rd sister, Lingdi, her transition from human to the form of a bird fairy carries the element of hallucinatory realism. And when the narrator presents an account of his family, he says, quote unquote, 3rd sister has already entered the avian realm. She sprang to her feet and spread her arms to soar into the sky. Mother, I want you to make an altar for me. I am now a bird fairy. This is how she leaves the world. So the description here is, we can see this girl falling in love with a local village man who is nicknamed as Birdman, okay, because he hunts birds for pleasures. And she used to bring these birds to feed the family. But then this man was caught and sent to Japan, and Lingdi becomes unstable after that, and she ends up with crying and waiting for him. This made her transform herself into a bird fairy to join her lost love. For 2 days, she lay lifeless on the kang. The next day, she became active, leaping onto the trees out of her courtyard, showing acrobatic skills that her family had never seen. So this is how she becomes the bird fairy. Here, the technique shifts between dreamlike state and reality. So here we can see how Moyan has used different techniques in his writings to build this hallucinatory realism. Finally, this happened when China opened itself to the world. At the end of the Cultural Revolution, China opened itself to know the different techniques that are used in world literature, and it had drawn its influences from the literatures of the world. This is how it happened. First, the Western literary works were translated in Chinese. That's how the Chinese writers were exposed to the literary traditions of the world, especially Latin American and American writings fascinated them. And this paved the way to know the literary trend of these two nations and of few writers like William Faulkner and Marcus. And Faulkner's idea of fictional setting, especially the novel Sound and Fury, attracted Moyan personally, to which he added native touch and he localized the content. Then he also started drawing details from his birthplace, that is the Paradise Country in Shandong province. Most of his novels are set in this place. And then the second stage is now Chinese writers started writing their work in the contemporary times of 1980s, 90s. Then their writings were translated in English, and Moyan's writings, for example, were translated from Chinese to English by Professor Howard Goldblatt. He is the professor of East Asian Studies, Notre Dame University. He engaged in research. Especially, he researched on Chinese literature. He did his doctoral studies on Chinese literature, and that's how he developed an interest for Chinese writing. And he brought it to the world, to the global audience, and created a cross-cultural reality by translating nearly 11 major works of Moyan's works in English. I think it's time. So in the interest of time, let me move on to the last part. The depiction here is a conflicting Chinese society where the individuals are shown to be resisting the reality and ultimately social resilience. When it comes to resistance, it is individual. When it comes to resilience, it is social. That brings a societal change. So this kind of transition is observed by the society, and the transition is also felt by the individual, and the individuals try to adapt themselves to the conflicts which lead to a social transformation and also social wellness within the paradigm of history, culture, people, and politics, depicting the social reality of China. So, in the process of social interaction, there involves resistance as well as resilience that leads to reciprocity of the individual and the society. They reciprocate to each other at the end. That includes the impacts of an individual's role on society. Individual's role has an impact on society, and then the conflict experienced by the individuals also help them to find their true self. This is how, out of major social conflicts and by withstanding major social conflicts, individuals, the characters in the narratives in the Chinese writings of contemporary times, show the ability of the individuals to withstand all the major social conflicts which I have listed that social history of China experienced. Ultimately, due to the ability of the individuals to withstand all these social conflicts, that results not only in certain behavioral change in individuals, but also it lead to social transformation. There is the transformation of the society. It brings a societal change and societal wellness. This is what ultimately the contemporary Chinese writings and especially Moyan's writing focuses upon, with its ultimate aim to show the transformation and how that transformation occurs and how individuals survive all the conflicts with resistance and resilience, so that resistance is individual and resilience becomes social. I think I'm already ahead of time, so I'm stopping here with Chinese literary narrative. Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah, well, that was a very paradigmatic description of hallucinatory realism and a very wonderful presentation by ma'am. Thank you, Dr. S. Chitra, for your presentation and time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Next, the next speaker I would like to call upon is Dr. Khatri. He is specialized in media semiotics and communication theory. He did his bachelor's in English literature from Gujarat University and master's in linguistics from MS University of Baroda, Vadodara. His doctoral study is on semiotic analysis of advertisements on print media. He bears more than 15 years of teaching experience at national as well as international level. He has published extensively in both Gujarati and English. His research is primarily on cultural aspects of communication and politics of representation. Presently, he works with the Navrachana University, Vadodara, and teaches film theory, popular culture, semiotics, and communication skills. He has published 3 books and around 40 articles. He is also associated with a couple of national and international journals as a reviewer. Uh, Dr. Khatri, sir?
Yes. Yeah.
So the
Am I
audience is all
audible?
yours. Yeah, enlighten us with your valuable information, sir. Please present yourself.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I'm sure all of the kind words that you have spoken, they're not all true. But thank you very much. Uh, Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Allow me to present my ideas in this conference on global trends in English language, literature, and linguistics. And I'm also thankful to my previous speakers. Both of them have spoken about two very interesting topics. And in fact, they have put the bar so high that I'll have to be even more careful now when I'm talking. I'll be taking around 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm taking this word global from our title of the conference, and I'll be talking about it. Can you share the screen?
Yes, sir, please. Yes, sir, it's visible.
I have a very simple visible.
Yes, sir, visible, sir, visible.
Start it. So this is the basic thing that I want to talk about: global trends and uh, localization. The moment we talk about globalization, probably within the same time, another term that developed in the cultural theories, uh, that's what we call globalization, something a mixture of global and local. So I want to talk about that aspect from the cultural perspective, how it is affecting the idea of literary production. So let us begin with this very basic definition of what globalization is. This is a term introduced in early 1980s and used principally to describe the world expansion of economic markets in the late 20th century. The moment we started talking about free market, uh, that economic aspect comes with this idea of globalization. And this idea of free market and globalization is seen by most of the cultural theories as something related with the Americanization of the world. That is, uh, it's a different form of capitalism, as what we say. Like there is idea of linguistic imperialism, or what we call globalization, directly associated with the capitalization or Americanization of the world or mechanicization. So through various means, the market has encroached into our life, and we have started accepting the products, we have started consuming the ideas and products which were not the indigenous ideas and products for us. So we are expanding our horizons in terms of what was not ours, now we are making it ours. But at the same time, there is that conflict of losing something while accepting something new. Now, this idea of globalization also comes with the kind of technical revolution, especially in the field of communication, in the field of transport. And that's why the communication guru, Marshall McLuhan, used this word and he presented this idea of global village in his books, The Gutenberg Galaxy and Understanding Media. In both these books, he talks about this notion of global village, where the phenomenon of the entire world becoming more interconnected as the result of the propagation of media technologies throughout the world. Today, we can watch a movie, for example, on OTT platform from any part of the world. That was not possible probably before 15 years. Because of internet now, it has become possible. So communication has become a very easy thing across the borders. So those borders have been like technologically removed so that we can easily contact and communicate with the people all around us. So, for example, right now, the kind of conference we are having, we're all located in different parts of the world, and still we are in communication, we are interacting with certain important ideas and minds. But the world tied together into a single globalized marketplace and village. So the major dominance in this very idea of globalization or global village, of course, McLuhan was not considering the economic aspects when he was talking about global village. He was primarily concerned with the communication and communication technologies. But because of the dominance of the economy, the globalization is more like a huge market. So it's not just a village, but it becomes a marketplace of that village. And this economic understanding of globalization converts the world into a marketplace, and the humans, we are all into nothing but the consumers. We have to buy the products, we have to buy the ideas that comes from the economically dominant countries, places, or the people. And this is where this notion of global village and globalization started creating problem for the local discourses. So what's happened is there are multiplicity of trends, like when Superman was talking about, she was talking about this Chinese author who has, in his writing, the multiplicity of narrations, multiplicity of what we call point of views. Similarly, in the world also, we can see multiple trends working at a single time. So in the field of art, two parallel trends can be observed. The first and the dominant one is the market-driven, which is consumer-centric production of work of art, which is largely concerned with the economic advantages and short-term impact on the overall artistic scenario. So like in India, we have novelists like Chetan Bhagat and Mr. Kwati, and there are a lot of such novelists who are quite popular among Indian readers, but they don't make any significant change on the overall artistic scenario. The second, the more of a response to the first trend, that is artistic adventures that attempts to raise serious issues related with identity. But when you're talking about globalization, everyone is equal and everyone is a consumer. The first thing the what human will face is the identity crisis. Who are you? And there is this identity issues in the novels, and humanitarianism, many novels, poems, films that talk about the humanitarian issues and the aesthetic concerns. So this second trend is closer to what we have the understanding, the classical understanding of what literature or what the work of art is. This second trend may or may not be an economic success, but it has a long-term impact on artistic scenario. So, for example, when you read a novel by Salman Rushdie, uh, he is quite a big name now, so you don't have to worry about the economic success of his novel. But the kind of ideas, the kind of presentations, the kind of issues that he is raising in his novels are something that will create a long-term philosophical, literary, what we call impact. So in this particular juncture, we can simultaneously observe something like a world of Salman Rushdie or Mark Twain's, where this magical realism is working. Or on the other hand, you have Hindi pop or indie pop and Qawwali culture. Like you have Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who used to sing for the Hollywood films as well. Though his Urdu Qawwalis were incomprehensible for Hollywood audience. But his qawwalis were present there. And he has sung for some of the greatest filmmakers of Hollywood. So he becomes a kind of a global personality. His nephew, who's also a singer now, or A.R. Rahman, who is a legend now in the field of music. So now he is not a kind of composer or an artist for one country or for one film industry. He becomes a global man. Similarly, you have African American cinema, similarly African American literature. Then you have McDonald outlets and its presence in popular culture. You find McDonald's everywhere, like in India and Saudi Arabia. Everywhere you find these outlets. Now, this is primarily a kind of American product, and it is its presence there, and we accept it as part of our daily routine, and we prefer to go to McDonald's to what we call enjoy certain types of parties. We celebrate our birthdays in McDonald's. So it becomes gradually part of our popular culture. Or on the other hand, you have Murdoch's communication empire. Rupert Murdoch's owns the majority of the media. So there is a kind of control involved when you take charge of the possibilities of communication. And Noam Chomsky has written a lot about it. Then you have the Indian filmmakers like Shekhar Kapoor making a movie like Elizabeth in 1998, and movie was nominated for Oscar also. Now he is an Indian, and he doesn't have to do anything with the British history, but he is allowed by the studio to make an American film. Then, on the other hand, you have Danny Boyle making a movie like Slumdog Millionaire, which is based on Q&A by Buzzword, which is an Indian novel. An Indian novel taken up and adapted by an American and making a Hollywood film, and which earns a lot of awards and applause. So that's where the trends are going. That's where the globalization is impacting us. But now, if you have a little content, you don't have to stick to your area or your society or your community. There are a lot of possibilities for you, and people are there who can take up your work or your creativity and can create something that's what we call a global product that everybody can have access to that product. Similarly, we have Ang Lee, he is basically Taiwanese, who's making a film like Life of Pi, which was again based on a philosophical novel by Jan Martel. He's Canadian. And this novel, Life of Pi, is about a Tamil boy. So, which identities are getting together in creating this one small project in this global world? So, and even in the field of linguistics, especially in last 2 decades, there are a lot of linguists concerned with the indigenous cultures and languages. I know few people who are working on Indian tribal languages, and these people are from Oxford and Australia, and there are people from Japan who are working on that. So there are two things happening. One is there's something that is considered very indigenous, and it was very specific to a particular society, community, or culture. And because of this globalized culture and now the openness of communication, those things are reaching to the entire world. There is something called Pithora painting. That's basically a form of painting practiced by the tribals of Gujarat. There's a tribal community called Rathwa, who live on the border of Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. And they have a very specific type of painting, which is called Pithora painting. Now, this particular painting is also available uh, across the world, that people who can easily recognize that this is Pithora. So that indigeneity, because of the globalization, has attained a kind of global presence, which is something very important and very good. Now you can explore your own issues and you put it in a way that the people from other cultures, other societies can also empathize or understand it. So I'll give you one small example here. You must have seen or heard about this movie Parasite, which was made in 2019 by South Korean director Bong Joon-ho. The movie was about the class conflict with reference to two South Korean families from two different economic classes. Now, director Bong Joon-ho never tried to make it accessible for the global audience. He made that movie in Korean. He doesn't make it in what we call English language, or he doesn't even use the Hollywood stars so that people would be attracted to watch that movie. He is stick to his culture, his people, and the emotions that he wants to present. He stayed loyal to his culture, locale, and conflict. Yet the film achieved global success and wins almost all the major awards for films, all the international major awards for films. And while accepting one award, Bong Joon-ho said this, that once you overcome the 1-inch tall barrier of subtitles, you will be introduced to so many more amazing films. That is, there are works of art available in many other languages, which are like very different uh, in terms of form, in terms of content. And if we can accept this certain level of globalized language, probably we will have access to all those different forms of arts and we can explore more into that area. For example, Gujarati language has accepted a form of poem called haiku, which is primarily a Japanese form of poem. But there are a lot of Gujarati poets who practice haiku poems. Or ghazal, which was basically Iranian Perso-Arabic root, is very much famous in Gujarati and Hindi as well. And we have started practicing those forms. These were not basically the indigenous forms of the Gujarati or Hindi language works of art. So what's happening here is when we have this local and global side by side, there are certain levels of conflicts. And primarily, people talk about the conflicts in terms of the threat to the culture or the threat to the indigeneity. So, like Manuel Castells says, that there is no such thing as a global single society. It's not possible to have a global single society because each society because it has its own characteristics, it has its own way of living, its own what we call typical practices, norms, rituals, and because of which that society is different from the other societies. This is what the identity of the people. And when you are like imposing certain level of global trends on every society, there there has to be some level of conflict. So when the local voices are raised, probably those voices are individualistic, or some individuals are raising those voices to create the awareness among other members of the local community. These voices can come in direct conflict with the dominant culture of the given society. Globalization is accepted as long as it is just about economy. We are happy to do business with any country of the world, but we don't want to accept their ways of living in our society. That's the kind of globalization that we have accepted so far. Yeah, there has been a lot of changes coming because of the new generation coming in direct contact with other cultures. But the status quo is still in the favor of the original culture. In other domains, for example, non-economic domains, it is normally seen as the threat to the dominant culture. So this the discourse on nationalism or the discourse on uh, religious aspects or the discourse on the caste in India, that discourse is very, very powerful. So this entire right-wing politics across the world runs on this dichotomy of global economy and indigenous culture. So global and local, though they coexist, they are constantly in certain level of conflicts. You can just check certain recent controversies in India and abroad. For example, there was this web series in India called Patal Lok. What is interesting is it is on OTT platform, so anyone across the world can uh, watch that web series if they have what we call access to that particular OTT platform. Now, these particular web series talks about certain local issues. There are four different stories, and all four of them are coming from very interior rural areas. And all these stories are challenging the standardized dominant political scenario of the country or of the society. And there has been a very huge controversy, and people have asked to ban that particular web series. Though it worked, you can still watch that web series. Was some 2 years back that happened. There are recent such stories like there is this web series called The Suitable Boy. There was controversy related with it. Or if you go back a few years, like there was a movie by Mira Nayak, if I'm not wrong, called Water. The movie was supposed to be made in Varanasi because it was about the people, the historic aspect of Varanasi. But the right-wing politicians didn't allow it. That there has been a lot of movement against it, and they had to ship to Sri Lanka to shoot that movie. And that movie was ultimately released from Canada, and it was the official Oscar entry from Canada. But it was a movie about the certain historical period of India, certain issues related with India. And NRI, an Indian director, is making that film, and all the artists were Indians. But that movie did not have the Indian identity. It did not get released in India. It did not get the name of an Indian film. Similarly, like we must have seen this kind of advertisement. This is very, very normal in India. KFC is so veg, so good. Now, globalization adjusting itself for the local culture. This is one of the most important and very glaring example that you find. This is from India. A KFC, by definition, by name, is Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they are offering a menu here in India that does not have chicken because they have to take care of the local people. And of course, India is not statistically dominant vegetarian country, but in public space, having meat is not very acceptable in many cases. and especially in case like cities and states like Gujarat, vegetarianism is very prominent, very dominant. So KFC has to introduce the vegetarian uh, dish or vegetarian menu for their consumers. So ultimately, what I wanted to say was globalization has brought in a lot of changes in our perception of what we are seeing as literature, as society, as economy. But at the same time, globalization has also brought in certain new types of challenges, primarily related with the identity conflict. So this is where this idea of globalization, that the very important and dominant corporations has to adjust themselves for the local public and local consumers and local society. So that kind of what we call changes will bring in new trends in what we call literature and what is specifically known as the work of art. So that's all from my side. Thank you. Thank you for such a good audience, for being such a good audience. Any questions from your side?
Yes.
Sharing? Yeah.
Well, that was a very concise and commendable representation on your side on the globalization concept. A very commendable presentation. Thank you for that. So with that, we come to an end of this keynote speaker session 2 of the second day of this conference. And I would like to note to all the participants uh, that you are left with 10 more days time till 29th of July 2021 for any modification update in the article or the paper which you submitted. Publication process will start after the selected articles papers converted as per standard publication format. Participants presenters will receive e-certificate till 24th July 2021 tentatively, and the hard copy of the certificates and proceeding books after 15th of August 2021. The online publication will be tentatively on 10th of August 2021. With that, we almost come to the end of this keynotes session speak and with that, I thank you all for being a wonderful audience. And we have one more presentation session for this conference that will be after at 3 o'clock, and we're gonna join back in 5 more minutes. So please be ready. The presenters are requested to be ready with their presentations in their background. So we take a 5 minutes break, and we join back for the last session in this conference.